the Lord says he wants abundant life for us, right? And like which path, Western man, the path that tells you to get married, to work your hardest at honest work, to save money, to invest it, to raise children, to go to church, to be a good citizen, or the path that says, the other guy's a fascist. I want a government-run grocery store. Let the criminals walk the streets. I think it's pretty clear, and I think, frankly, it's a warning to Democrats whose political problems are piling up.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview.
Welcome to the Outstanding Podcast. I'm Casey Harper, your host for today. On this show, we dive into key cultural, political, and spiritual issues in the news from a biblical perspective. Today, we're talking about the implosion of the Democrat Party. You heard that right. A recent New York Times report showed that of the 30 states that maintain voter registration records by political party, the rest don't, but of the 30 that do, Republicans registered more voters than Democrats in all of them, 30 out of 30. That's from between 2020 to 2024. Overall, that means that 4.5 million voters more were registered for Republicans than Democrats. It's a huge gap, could take Democrats years to make up. And of course, that stat is embedded in a very complicated political landscape and trends. And we're going to talk about that on this show and what it means for you and what it means for the kingdom. Of course, it's not all about red and blue, but red and blue make a difference. And as we fight these battles, and we have two great guests to talk about those topics, two of the best. Mark Tapscott, he's a veteran. That's award-winning, and that doesn't mean old. That means storied, Award-winning investigative reporter and editor Mark Tapscott. He's also the Washington Stand senior congressional analyst. He's also founder and editor of Hill Faith at hillfaith.org. Mark, thanks for jumping on.
My pleasure.
Yes, of course, is ours as well. And we have Matt Carpenter. He's a director of FRC Action, where he's responsible for overseeing FRC Action activities, which includes voter education and mobilization, very pertinent for today's topics. Thanks, Matt, for coming on.
Thanks for the invite, Casey. Great to be with you. And Mark.
Yeah, so I have a lot of articles on my desk. I have the New York Times one. I have different Gallup polls, and I want to get into them because I don't want us to just be, I suspect all three of us can bloviate, and maybe, it's a skill. But I want to bring in the data here too. And I want to start with you, Matt, because of that voter registration data, that sounds bad. To me, as someone who's not, I've never worked on a campaign. I've never, counted counties to see, how many voters, what percentages we have in this county. I've never done that, but that's more your expertise. How important is voter registration data? What does it mean? And why are Democrats seemingly really concerned about this new report?
This is a significant report because, you think about, if you're a candidate running in any given state and let's say you're a Republican in Massachusetts, you simply do not have a pool of voters to draw from to be competitive. So you have to appeal to independents. And you actually, in a place like Massachusetts, you have to win Democrats as well. That's the case in Illinois. That's for Republicans running in Illinois and in California. And then in some of those states, it's just an insurmountable lead for Democrats when you just look at the sheer number of registered Democrats compared to Republicans, and vice versa, true for Democrats running in these Republican states as well. So when you start to see the voter registration numbers shift, as we're seeing, what you're really starting to see is a change in the overall, voter, engagement. It's a tectonic shift is really what it is. I think it's safe to say, of the 20 states that don't allow people to register with a partisan affiliation, those trends are probably also present there. You probably also have people who are registered to vote, not with a party, but saying to themselves, I think I need to reevaluate my voting history and start looking at different candidates. And so I think we're going to get into some of maybe the more granular aspects of this going forward. But I don't think you can stress enough. This amounts to basically a sea change, really, in American politics.
Okay, so we're on to something here talking about this. This isn't just a nothing burger. It's not just a rogue poll that's kind of overstating the case. It's even stronger than a poll because it's hard registration data. Mark, I want to ask you, you talk to you have a lot of great sources in Congress, all over DC. That's, what was major reporting so great over the years. When you talk to Democrats, do you get a sense of their concern over this? Do Democrats, and from my perspective, they seem a little divided. They seem to be lacking identity. They seem to have not recovered since Obama, stepped down as the leader of the party in the official capacity. They haven't found their identity yet. Is that your sense when you talk to them? Are they aware of the problem? Do they even agree on what the problem is?
There was yesterday, I think it might have been on Fox or CNN, a reporter asked Senator Elizabeth Warren about the bad effect of hate speech from the left with regard to people like Charlie Kirk. And Warren's reaction instantaneously was basically, why don't you go ask President Donald Trump that question?
Yeah.
And when I first heard that, I thought to myself, it takes a tremendous amount of chosen blindness to give an answer like that, because it's clear Democrats on the left side of the party, which is by far the biggest part of it, they have not yet figured out that they just have lost touch with most Americans. And the fact that the voter registration is changing, and particularly among young voters, that's unprecedented. It's analogous to what FDR did, the tectonic change that the New Deal did in American politics. I'm not so old that I was there back then, but I've read about it. Labor workers who previously had voted in significant proportions Republicans went Democrat, and black voters who were almost unanimously Republican prior to the New Deal became almost unanimously Democrat after that. And that fundamentally changed the political alignment in this country. And I think we're seeing that same sort of tectonic change happening now.
Yeah, I mean, so you brought up a few interesting points there. Of course, tragic shooting of Charlie Kirk, and in its own right is a national tragedy. It's very personal. I hesitate too quickly to just make it political, but it does have political ramifications. Yeah. And I don't think we're going to know what those are for months fully. It's going to take a long time to understand what that really does to the electorate. But I want to go into something with you, Matt, that Mark brought on, which is when Democrats are asked about things, there's a knee-jerk reaction to attack Trump. And my sense of one of the things that Democrats are struggling with right now is they don't have issues anymore. Under Obama, it was very clear like what their issues were. It was about healthcare. Maybe it was about housing. It could be about different things. Trump ran really clearly on certain issues like the border, and that helped him win. But Democrats, I think they've lost a side of what their issues are. And please tell me I'm wrong. They've just become mostly a party of anti-Trump. And I think for Democrats in safe districts or more blue districts or states, that really helps them. It helps them raise a lot of money, helps them win their election. But for whatever reason, in national elections and in maybe tighter states, it doesn't always work. And it's not enough to win the House, the Senate, and the White House because enough people do like Trump. So is that an accurate assessment? What do you think are the Democrats' issues right now, or do they even know?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I do agree with your assessment that I think the Trump campaign was centered much more around identifying the pain points of the American people and addressing them with, frankly, just common sense proposals. Oh, there's an immigration problem. Let's secure the border. Let's deport people who came here illegally. Oh, there's a crime problem. Let's get boots on the ground in some of these places where federal law enforcement where law enforcement's not doing its job, right? He spoke about the cost of living crisis. These are all issues those are probably the top three issues that people cared about when they went into the booth to vote or they filled out their ballots. And Democrats' rejoinder was, what about abortion? What about abortion? Abortion is an economic issue. Abortion is a social justice issue. Abortion is a climate justice issue. And that just missed the mark. They're operating from the most fervent, frenetic fever swamps of their base. They're trying not to lose the attention of the most committed members on their base, and they're basically trying to substitute an actual policy agenda, of solutions for the problems the American people are facing with platitudes and with attitude and with accusations against their opponents, and that's just not gonna I don't mean to disparage, like the normal, there's a term normie, right, in political circles.
Yeah.
That's not helpful really, for what we're trying to do. But like, just think of the person who's not plugged in, constantly consuming content about the status of the country, but they want to vote and they want to be an engaged citizen. That person's not going to be motivated to vote by a political party, which is not going to tell them how they're going to make their streets safer, give their kids a better future, and bring down the cost of living. If all you're doing is talking to them about abortion and how evil the other guys are. So Democrats they have this kind of operating system that is not connecting with the average voter, I would say, at the moment.
You agree with that, Mark?
Yeah, I do very much, and I would further point out that when Democrats have put themselves in a corner in recent years, it's not merely that they have this Trump derangement syndrome. Trump can do nothing right. But beyond that, they have so often, with reference to anybody who disagrees with them, you're Hitler or you're Stalin or you're a fascist. And there's no compromise. If you are portraying your opposition as Hitler, how could you ever even think about compromising with them? So they've put themselves in a position where they can't back off of that radical position,
Right.
and it leaves them basically with no options. They're in deep trouble. I think probably deeper than even we realize.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see the midterms. I mean, of course, Trump's in his second term, so eventually the term limits might save them. One thing you've kind of both hinted at is the division within the Democratic Party. I find this fascinating. I have this story in front of me. This is probably as big a deal as the voter registration, maybe not quite to the level, but I'll read this off now. It's a Wall Street Journal poll that came out, and it says that Democrats have their lowest rating from voters in 35 years. So the new survey finds that 63% of voters hold an unfavorable view of the Democratic Party, the highest share in journal polls dating back to 1990, and 30 percentage points higher than the 33% who hold a favorable view. So only 33% hold a favorable view. And what's really interesting about this when you dig into it, of course, there's kind of a wholesale rejection of the Democratic Party laid out in this poll, but a lot of the rise in unfavorability among Democrats is that members of the Democratic Party traditionally are very upset with their own party and they are not satisfied. You see, Republicans are generally much happier with the Republican Party right now, whereas Democrats are very frustrated. And I think that's a problem that in my mind, the Democrats haven't figured out how to answer, because in some sense, they still have these sort of Bill Clinton Democrats who want to be more moderate or Southern and folksy and not offend people and try to get everyone to come together. But as you said, Mark, there's a very rabid, zealous wing of the party now that thinks that basically Republicans are fascists who are trying to, kill trans people or something, something like that. And so they have this religious fervor to it. And I don't know, Matt, how you bring those two together. Maybe you just need a really charismatic Obama-like figure to do it. But right now they don't have anyone like that, I don't think.
Yeah, no, they certainly don't. I know they just the DNC just elected, after the 2024 election, a new chair. I believe his name is Ken Martin, and also vice chairs. And like months after they elected these new officers, David Hogg, who since resigned, signaled his intention to primary Democrat incumbents who he deemed not sufficiently progressive enough. Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, which I believe is the largest teachers union in the country, a solidly Democratic-leaning group of voters, institution, also resigned. So you have this pressure coming from the grassroots to the DNC now, saying you're not sufficiently progressive, but at the same time, they're also lagging significantly in cash on hand. So the Democratic donor class is withholding funds from them. So now they have pressure from above too. And the DNC, which is supposed to hold these two coalitions together, is just twisting in the wind. They're just wilting under this dual pressures coming at them from above and below.
That was hard to interrupt, but that's fascinating. You point that out. I hadn't thought of that. Is that maybe you don't know why, but is that because of how poorly the money was handled by the Harris campaign? I mean, Kamala Harris famously raised like $1 billion in a month, basically. I mean, not quite. It's overstating a little bit, but she raised like this incredible amount of money and then spent it even faster. And despite only having such a short campaign, she ended up in debt, and I think the DNC had to bail her out. Do they feel that that money was wasted, or do they just feel generally that the Democrats do not have a vision, they don't have a leader yet, and so it's not a good investment?
Casey, I don't know the answer to that question. My gut tells me it's an all of the above issue. I'm sure you have donors who look at the party and think, "What are we doing? We just blew $1 billion on a Kamala Harris campaign that lost us the national popular vote, the electoral college vote in a landslide." Wondering how their money's being used. You probably have other Democratic donors who agree with David Hogg and say the party's not progressive enough. Then you probably have some others who see the rising, anti-Semitism in the party, and maybe are wondering about why are so many Democratic district attorneys letting criminals walk the street, letting them out of prisons, right? And maybe having legitimate concerns about the direction the party's going, and they're sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what's going to happen. So I don't think we know enough to really say, but my gut tells me it's an all of the above thing for each donor. It's a different issue, probably.
Yeah, Casey, yeah. I have to think back in my career. One of my heroes in Congress is former Texas Democrat Congressman Jack Brooks. Jack Brooks was a no-nonsense liberal Democrat. And when he was chairman of the House Oversight Committee, bureaucrats in the executive branch were petrified when they were called to testify before, because they knew he would not put up with any nonsense. They had to give him the straight story, or he would, cut their budget. Yeah. Jack Brooks today would I'm sure, I absolutely am positive that Jack Brooks, if he saw the Democratic Party's attitude towards crime and cashless bail and issues like that, he would say, "You people have lost your minds." Jack Brooks he favored big government, but he understood that government has to be efficient. It has to deliver in order to be credible, and he was willing to make that case. I don't know of any Democrats today that would say the same thing. This is not the Democratic Party of our fathers.
Yeah. So, Matt, what Mark's talking about there is the leftward shift in the Democratic Party. I mean, Biden, in some ways, I think, claimed to be a return to moderation, or at least that's how people perceived or hoped he would be when they voted for him. But he wasn't the Biden of 20 years ago. He was actually, well, now we know he wasn't even really running the country for much of the time. We don't know exactly who was running the country, but it was a lot of pretty progressive millennial staffers is what it feels like. And we had some pretty, egregious things like the Trans Day of Visibility on Easter, and total embrace of DEI policies throughout the federal government, and some of what's been labeled as woke, worst of woke policies. So Biden didn't really deliver on he opened the border in a way that no president ever has, far more liberal on the border than even Obama was. So there's sort of that promise or that sense of, okay, maybe Biden will be the moderate answer, so we don't have to resort to Bernie. I think that's how Democrats perceived it, but that didn't happen at all. And yet the left wing of the party still was really frustrated with Biden. And he was called out for his role in Israel. I mean, they were not satisfied with Biden, even as far left as he went. And so what is this leftward push? Is it still moving left? Do the leftists in the Democratic Party, do they care about electability? What's your sense of that?
Casey, I wonder how much of this is tied to the sort of just decline of the traditional media space that the left had dominated forever. Mm-hmm. The cable news networks are collapsing. And those were networks that were very capable of pitching that packaging that we were talking about with Biden 20 years ago, right? The Biden 20 years ago, the guy who supported the Hyde Amendment, right? I believe he supported the Hyde Amendment. I could be wrong on that. Yeah. Obviously now, his last term, full funding for abortion. There was a DOD policy where they were reimbursing service members for abortion, travel, things of that nature. Complete 180 from where he was. But what the cable news networks could do is put a veneer on it and say, hey, we're liberal, but this is the mainstream. We're not going to rock the boat. We just have a different opinion. With the decline of that space, and I would question their intentions. I think that they were probably happy to have a moderately packaged progressive candidate, in a progressive president, moderate candidate to the voter. But I think for the average voter, you see him on TV, you trust to some extent the person giving you this information. You're able to trust the packaging that's presented to you. The decline of that space has, I think, pushed people to different voices, and when they're independent, they're much more able to speak their mind. Naturally, that's going to, I think, elevate more progressive voices as people are looking for people who are saying maybe something outrageous, right? Or maybe they're looking for someone who thinks like I do. So I think that is a big factor here in that leftward lurch among the Democrats in general.
Yeah. Okay. So where this goes, I want to try to look ahead, and I want to talk about some of the spiritual implications of this. But where I sort of see this going now is a push towards socialism on the left in a more tangible way. And I think we're starting to see that pop up with AOC, with Mamdani. I think is like a shot across the bow, a warning sign that when this left wing of the Democrat Party feels ignored and failed by the Democrats, which they clearly do, they're very upset with you pointed to David Hogg as a great example. They're very upset with the leadership. They're turning to increasingly radical figures like Mamdani. And we have this other Gallup poll that just came out that said that the image, basically the people's perception of capitalism is steadily declining, and their image of perception of socialism has gotten up to almost 40% positive in the U.S. 39% positive perception of socialism in the United States, and only 54% favorably viewing of capitalism. So that in the last 4 years, capitalism's viewing has dropped from 60% favorability to 54%. And there are still plenty of people who have a negative view towards socialism, but capitalism is losing ground. And Family Research Council President Tony Perkins has rightly pointed out that capitalism without Christian morality and faith doesn't work well, because you need an inner guide, a conscience, the inner testament of the Word, the Holy Spirit, to rein in the greed and the taking advantage of people that can happen when you just let capitalism run loose. But the other side of that is socialism, which doesn't work, which oppresses people, which leads to a very oppressive, controlling government. What do you make? Either guy, I want to hear both of you on this, but what do you guys make of Mamdani and this increasing push towards a liberal version of economic populism that I think Trump kind of captured economic populism on the right, and now they're trying to do that with socialism? I think it's a bigger threat than maybe people are giving it credit for. But Mark, you, and then I want to hear from Matt.
That Gallup poll that you just cited has gotten a lot of attention, and I have to say I'm very skeptical of it, and here is why. The narrative that has come out in the mainstream media based on that poll is that young people are moving to socialism. They're dissatisfied with capitalism. But at the same time, there is a tremendous amount of survey data that is growing, quite frankly, that among Gen Z and millennials, there is a huge movement to the right, if you will, spiritual movement, reading the Bible more frequently, making a commitment to Jesus as your personal savior. And the most amazing thing about it to me is Gen Zs and millennials now actually go to church more frequently than my generation, the boomer generation, does. Usually, traditionally, it's always been the other way around. I don't see how you can be moving in the direction of traditional conservative, what we would consider traditional conservative evangelical Christianity, scriptural Christianity. At the same time, you're moving in a direction to have the government become your God, which is what socialism is. So I'm very skeptical of that narrative in the mainstream media.
Well, it's an interesting point, and it's definitely true that there's some kind of revival happening in Gen Z.
It's huge.
It's certainly possible to have the revival happening with half, maybe more than half of the country, while those who resist the revival become even more extreme to the left. And I think what it seems to me like where this is going is we're going from Republican versus Democrat to MAGA versus socialism. I think that is like where the youth are trending to, and I think that's not better than where we've been, and so that's what I see. What do you think? What do you think, Matt?
Look, I sympathize with young people who are trying to get into the workforce and trying to find spouses and get married, and look at the cost of housing. And just, I think I remember after COVID, it was like, I saw some data point. It was like 60% of all the dollars that have ever been in existence were printed during COVID.
Right.
And of course, that's going to cause a cost of living crisis. And I think I want to sympathize with young people who, maybe they've not read Milton Friedman, or they're not, and I don't fault them for that. Right. Yeah. But they're looking for someone to blame for all this. And they're thinking, well, why can't I just get a house? Like, just give me a house, they and they're wrong. As a Christian, I believe, I believe Scripture endorses the idea of private property. I believe in the administration of justice in the marketplace with prohibiting unequal weights and measures. I think that's you can draw a straight line, I think, from that principle right into today. Right, you shouldn't be able to trade with insider information and make a profit in the stock market that's not information available to the public, for example. So I think Christians in this space need to be saying there has to be justice for people who, sunk the world into a financial crisis in 2008, and who went to jail for that. If that's the example of capitalism we're offering, then I think it needs the reform. And I agree with Tony's remarks 100%. You can't just have the blessings of the free market without the conscious, and the morality that have been just sewn into our system. You can't remove those. Just like you can't remove prayer from the public schools, you can't remove God from our education system. Look at the state of our education system. It's the same thing. You have to have God in the government. You have to have God in the schools as well.
Yeah, well, there's a lot we could say there. I'm interested in this idea of how does the revival, does a spiritual revival automatically lead to a move away from socialism? That's an interesting question. I think traditionally Christians have been very opposed to socialism. Think of like Ronald Reagan era, communism, socialism, where the spiritual enemy of the nation, and that was how it's perceived. It was a fight against good and evil. But I think there's more Christians today because of this grip that I call it faux compassion, has on the nation, the same compassion that drives you to let out a career criminal or to let in a career criminal across the border, either let them out of jail when they've done something or to let them in illegally across the border. It's sort of like this sense of like, well, we're trying to be kind and help these people, but it actually kind of destroys the country. I think that same motivation is what drives the push towards socialism. So that's a very spiritual question if anyone you want to weigh in, but how do we harness this revival that's happening and get people educated and taught so that the fruit of it's not stolen?
Casey, I think you ought to have this Carpenter fellow on here more frequently. Because
I like him. He's good, isn't he? Yeah, he's good.
He really hit on a fundamentally important point that rarely gets discussed. He mentioned 2008, the financial crisis, and the fact that nobody went to jail for that.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how often I have heard from voters and regular people saying, nobody's ever going to go to jail for that. You talk about Russiagate, nobody's gone to jail for that.
Epstein.
And I think economic populism with Trump is a reaction to that. They see the way the establishment, if you will, ran the capitalist system, and they saw that it's not just because people don't go to jail. Trump is saying we have to hold people accountable, and he's determined to do that. In the next 2 years, as the economy improves, I think we will see that percentage of young people saying, let's try socialism, go way down, because they will begin to see the opportunities coming back. And I think 2 years from now, that Gallup poll that you cited earlier in the program, I think is going to be one of those forgotten, if you will, landmarks of the past, a pointer that didn't actually pan out for the future.
Well, I hope you're right about that, Mark. I hope you're right. And I think where I'm landing in this, and I'm probably going to give you the final word, Matt, but where I'm landing on this is that there's a sort of far left and a far right, and the one who motivates their side and captures the middle is the one who speaks with real clarity and honesty about the economic issues. And that's what Trump did. He identified the pain points of manufacturing and trade. And there's other things he did, but he spoke about what was actually hurting people. And while Democrats talked about like abortion and DEI, and I mean, maybe it just kind of felt less relevant. And so I think whoever addresses and speaks clearly to the issue of housing, of the cost of groceries, which have exponentially, I got married 5 years ago, and our grocery bill, I've been blaming my wife, and now I read the data, and it's not her fault. Our grocery bill is like doubled. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And so, and there's rhetoric. There's politicians give speeches, and they talk about the cost of eggs, and it's kind of just, it doesn't land. But whoever produces a leader for the party who's able to speak in a really compelling way and merge sort of maybe a more positive view of the country, channel some of the anger, and convince people they can address the economic problems like Matt brought up, housing and different things, I think they're going to have the edge as we go into a post-MAGA world here in 3 years, and we kind of try to reset the landscape when Trump is out of the scene. Matt, final word for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the kind of the other point you're saying about who's going to be able to harness the Gen Z energy the most. I mean, I just think, the gospel, the Lord says he wants abundant life for us, right? And like which path, Western man, the path that tells you to get married, to work your hardest at honest work, to save money, to invest it, to raise children, to go to church, to be a good citizen, or the path that says, the other guy's a fascist. I want a government-run grocery store, let the criminals walk the streets. I think it's pretty clear. And I think, frankly, it's a warning to Democrats whose political problems are piling up. But they need to be looking inwards and figure out, which of those paths are they on. And I just hope they hear the gospel. And I hope it resonates with them. I hope they see that it's not being wielded politically, but it's coming spiritually,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's a great point, and I think we need the gospel. We need this revival that Mark and you, Matt, also talked about. And I think, and I said this on Washington Watch with Tony not too long ago, but I think this generation is a lot like Solomon, and they've tried everything. They had access to every pleasure and enough wealth to taste everything and find that it was lacking and that it couldn't give them what they wanted. And now it's sort of a coming home and saying, okay, well, what are my roots? What are the things that would give me meaning, purpose, the scripture, church, family, relationships, discipleship, the presence of God, and a return to those things because everything else was meaningless and hopeless. I pray and hope that it continues and that we can channel it into a greater political revival, or in the revival, I guess I should say, into a reformation in our nation, which is what I think we need. But we're out of time. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for listening. This is the Outstanding Podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, comment. All of that helps us with the algorithm. We're not, YouTube, and we're not on great terms right now. They're not really happy with us because we've been talking about controversial issues from a biblical perspective. So we rely on you, the listeners and viewers, to share this because they're not always going to promote us. But I think we're worth promoting and that God is speaking through this show now. Mark, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate your insight. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview. This podcast is made in the USA by producer Casey Harper, production assistant Rachel Woods, technical producers David Salkeld and Yusuf Fletcher, and executive producer Jared Bridges. Help support us by texting the word OUTSTANDING to 67742 and read more at WashingtonStand.com.